Let's just say I'm Frankenstein's monster.
Magneto is the most developed character in X-Men First Class. While the film deals with his friendship with Charles, the formation of the X-Men, the relationship between Charles, Erik, and Raven, and the foundation for Charles to become a teacher, no character in the film has a clearly outlined path the way Magneto does. We open the film with his origin, and we spend a sizable amount of time dealing with his quest for revenge and giving him multiple opportunities for change through Charles, and then we have that final moment where he accepts who he is. While the film is many things, for me it's always been a Magneto character study first and foremost. In this analysis, I want to break down Erik's character arc, which is perfectly summed up when he calls himself Frankenstein's monster. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, its original inspiration, Sebastian Shaw, and the Cold War setting all provide a series of comparisons between Erik and Frankenstein's monster that we'll discuss in detail. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is part of a long literary tradition of man-made monsters. One of its chief influences is the Golem of Prague. Originally, this was a Jewish myth that dealt with the Rabbi of Prague creating a golem from clay and water to help defend the Jewish people against attacks. The story has many variations, and it's often seen as an allegory for creation, either meaning divine creation or artistic creation, the ability of people to bring things into being, and oftentimes not being able to control them. The Golem is a story of morality and knowledge. Its events help one to understand the great mysteries of human capability, the lines we dare not cross, and the consequences of our actions. But it's also a story of anger and fear. Its events, more literally, are about people living in fear simply because of who they are, and their need for salvation. It's a story where one person creates what he views to be that salvation, and the Golem is haunted by that purpose. In case the connection isn't clear enough already, think back to comic book history of the late 1930s and 40s, predominantly Jewish creators creating stories about their saviors, their golems, that were interested in social justice for the persecuted. Characters like Superman and stories by the likes of Will Eisner had an undercurrent of the golem myth, trying to provide protection or hope for those that were regularly treated as subhuman, a problem that was most pronounced within the concentration camps of Nazi Germany. Erik begins the film in a concentration camp. He is the embodiment of the golem myth. In comics, this is more metatextual, as it's a person creating a character to represent these issues that slowly grew beyond their control. In the film, Erik is not out for blood for the sake of all Jewish people, and yet his power and struggle is one that speaks to Jewish history. In the finale of the film, Charles urges Erik to let the missiles firing on them go.
They're just following orders.
I've been at the mercy of men just following orders. Never again.
In that moment, there is some representation of the sentiment behind something like the Golem of Prague, the idea of protection, the need for power, and the fear created when you have none, especially when the only thing separating you from peace is who you are, the all-powerful spirit of conformity. Erik is an extreme case, but so is his experience. What happened to him is not something that we can easily forgive. Charles feels his pain through his powers, but that will never be the same as actually being there. For Charles, it's a voluntary moment. For Erik, it's an imposed eternity. Erik is a golem to a degree, and it's the mixture of his mother and Shaw that create him. The two main pieces of the golem are clay and water. Clay being symbolic of the physical, the body, and water being symbolic of life, circumstance. The body, the physical form, is from his birth. His mother literally created him, but it's the world around him, people like Shaw and the Nazi camps, that shape him. These two influences are ingrained into his very being, and from there, his powers grow, and he protects his own. Golem and the Jews, Magneto and the mutants. There's an important philosophical assumption we're making here that we will only slightly discuss, the idea of a posteriori knowledge. Mary Shelley drew much of her inspiration from the works of John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Both men developed a belief that we are blank slates. Who we are as people is not inherent, but rather molded by the state of the world and our limited perceptions. The golem myth operates in the same way, a blank being that becomes himself through living in the world. By extension, Erik sees himself as a product of the world rather than giving us an inherent belief in people, the opposite of Charles, who we see forming his worldview independently of circumstance. Mary Shelley uses Frankenstein to discuss some of these ideas and develops a complex relationship between the spirit of life and the life we live. There's more we could say here about the acquisition of knowledge and the dichotomy between Charles and Erik, with knowledge being the representation of privilege, but that's a much larger topic for another day. Before we can discuss Erik as the monster, we need to discuss Sebastian Shaw as Victor Frankenstein. Both men created monsters and developed differently throughout their respective works. However, their role is pivotal in understanding the themes and psychology of their creations. Ideally, we would try to discuss the Rabbi of Prague here as well to trace the literary evolution of this idea, but since that story has far too many iterations, that would not be possible. Victor Frankenstein is a very complex character arc. Since we're able to see him before his monster, there's a more complete picture of him than Shaw. Victor starts as a man fascinated by science, but again limited by his circumstance. He learns, realizes his knowledge is outdated, and proceeds to learn even more in an attempt to gain intellectual power, to light every dark corner, with light and dark being symbolic of the quest for knowledge and its inherent relationship with ignorance. Shaw does not have an arc. We open the film with his manipulating a situation that forces Erik to master his powers and become his weapon. Shaw never changes, and even after confronting his monster, he shows no guilt. He is more in line with Victor's initial personality, a person that seeks nothing but power. This goes to another deep difference between the two. Victor hates his creation and Shaw loves his. However, this might not entirely be fair. Victor is afraid of his monster. After a series of murders, Victor realizes he has no power over his monster, and his fear is base survival instinct. He has more in common with Raskolnikov from Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment than Vaughn's X-Men First Class. Both of those works discuss the power of guilt and the dehumanization of power in a way that isn't present here. Shaw may have been killed by Erik, but it wasn't without help. Shaw is never fearing for his life the way Victor is, and Shaw has nothing he wants to hold on to the way Victor does. Power plays a different role here, even if there are still connections to its ability to dehumanize. Victor sees himself as a consequence of his power just as much as his monster. Shaw is so physically powerful that he never thinks to process things beyond his control. Both men share this lack of humanity on separate extremes, with Victor cutting himself off from the world, whereas Shaw uses his superiority to build a new one. Now we can discuss the monsters themselves. While Frankenstein covers a wide range of themes and philosophy, the three main aspects of the monster and Erik's character that we want to discuss are social connection, emotional acceptance, and defining monstrosity. Monstrosity is also linked to morality. Is Erik a monster simply because he killed Shaw? Are the murders of Victor's family and friends what cements the monstrosity of his creation? Does his remorse at the end redeem him in a way that Erik's lack of remorse damns him? This leads into a further discussion of Erik's philosophy, his parallels to civil rights activists, and would ultimately require a much larger discussion, so we'll leave that out for now. One major difference between Erik and the monster is their ability to be part of the world. The monster's physical appearance is a major factor throughout the story. Much of the commentary deals with human inability to see past their base instincts, and those instincts being conditioned by a world that perpetuates certain stereotypes and standards. The monster may be caring and compassionate, even saving people several times, but his physical appearance is all it takes for the world to reject him. X-Men First Class deals with the same themes, both works being metaphors for race, gender, and socially constructed degrees of privilege. Beast and Mystique have more in common with the monster here, since their identities and arcs are connected to their appearance, whereas people like Charles and Erik can assimilate since their powers are not physical manifestations in the same way as Raven and Hank. Even so, let's focus on Erik and the monster. The monster tries to be part of the world several times. His life is originally seen as a gift. His patchworked appearance is a representation of social conditioning, inherent differences, and the universal idea of the other. He takes this as an opportunity to interact with the world. The problem is that the world denies him moral agency. They fear him and metaphorically deny the acceptance of the other in society. That society is only for those who conform to the dominant identity, whether that be standards of beauty, race, or gender. It's this state of the world that forces a change in the monster. He lashes out against his creator because he sees the world as a Kafkaesque nightmare. These truths and dangers then contribute to Victor's slow decline. Conversely, Erik never wants to be part of the world such as it is. He has a leg up on the monster since he knows the world's cruelties and isn't shocked by it. He instead denies any chance that he might have at peace.
Listen to me very carefully, my friend. Killing Shaw will not bring you peace.
Peace was never an option.
This struggle with the state of the world also creates one of the monster and Erik's most striking similarities, the point between rage and serenity. The monster's compassion and Erik's mother are both their connection to humanity. They see themselves as part of the world and deny social problems because of a pure desire. One simply loves life, and the other loves a specific person. Both are robbed of these in similar effect. The monster is constantly exiled for his appearance, while Erik's mother is killed in front of him to unleash his power. Both are reflective and condemning of the state of the world, both cause the two monsters to lash out against their creator, and neither see this as revenge, but rather a form of justice. While the monster condemns his creator for his arrogance, creating something he could not hope to control or help, Erik condemns his creator for dehumanizing him with power, bringing him to the same state as Shaw. The monster and Erik diverge when it comes to their levels of acceptance. While Charles tells Erik that killing will not bring him peace, Erik doesn't care. Accepting the point between rage and serenity, killing Shaw, and recruiting his own team of mutants all represent moments where Erik had a chance to change, to stop his crusade, and he never accepts them. Like Shaw, Erik is a static character. The monster, on the other hand, ends the novel by sobbing over the body of his creator. He regrets his actions and says he will kill himself. Like his creator, he gives in to guilt. As much as they wished vengeance and difference from their creators, they both ended up in the same situation. The most striking symbol of this is Erik keeping Shaw's helmet, cementing that Shaw is always part of him, always in his head, and blocking out Charles. The monster ultimately falls victim to the same emotional state as his creator, and historically, the monster is simply called Frankenstein, blending their two identities. Finally, both works attempt to use their monsters to discuss the concept of monstrosity. What is it about these two that earns them the title of monster? Marry Shelley studies this in detail, connecting the ideas of power, knowledge, identity, and morality to create a detailed study of humanity, otherness, and xenophobia. The concept of the monster becomes relative. The novel works to establish that standards of acceptance are just as malleable as laws of science, that over time, past ideas or theories become so outdated that we marvel at a time that they seemed generally accepted. This is represented by Victor's early studies and then his culture shock when he travels to university. Similarly, there are some things humanity is simply not ready for, which is personified by the advanced sciences that create his monster. X-Men First Class makes a similar case by using the backdrop of the Cold War. On both the American and Soviet sides, there is a need to gain more power. For various reasons, clear lines are drawn between the two, and so a communist is an American concept of a monster, while a capitalist is the Soviet concept of a monster. In that regard, this creates a state where there always needs to be an enemy to fight, whether it be other governments or mutants. It also parallels Mary Shelley's work by concluding that mutants are something that the world is simply not ready for. It's seen as the same kind of mad science that Victor Frankenstein experimented with. Magneto takes this as his reason to stand against humanity. It is this very need for conflict, denial of the other, that results in the building of nuclear weapons and the rapid creation of mutants, monsters as consequences for the state of the world, monsters that are only given that label because society doesn't know how to accept them.
This society won't accept us. We form our own. The humans have played their hand.
Now we get ready to play ours. Who's with me?